This bill today going through the House is about the amendment of a treaty that we signed up to through legislation back in 2012. And I think that's important to keep that in sight, to keep that in mind as well, that we're actually amending an international treaty that we signed up to here without the approval of the Irish people when we did enter into this treaty back in 2012. And the ESM itself, what is it? It's an institution that has an independent legal entity, and it has legal immunity from all courts across the European Union, all courts in the world, and it's not subject to the regulation under any EU laws or any EU state. So this is a body that is a law unto itself that we are amending the treaty for again today in this House. And the reason we're amending it is to give it the powers, so-called powers, for this direct recapitalisation of financial institutions in the euro area. And we're just going to amend this international treaty for this hugely powerful body, this hugely powerful secret body. Because although the Minister for Finance is a director of the ESM is not subject to freedom of information. Its meetings are held in secret. Its directors are bound by the privacy that takes place within the ESM. So there's no obligation or no right for us as citizens to know what the actual discussions are that are taking place within the ESM, except what it decides to tell us. And I think that is a very dangerous situation and a very dangerous position to be in. We have already paid over €1 billion into the ESM as a part of our capital call. The treaty that we signed up to in 2012 gives the ESM the right at any time to call for a further €10 billion from us as a nation to pay into their capital fund. And indeed, if that €10 billion isn't enough, they can, by their own decision, alter the requirements for capital and increase that again to infinity, whatever they want. And they can use this funding to leverage unlimited borrowing on the international markets at their discretion, without any say from any member state of the European Union or the euro area or anything else. And we are bound by this treaty to change our laws and amend it and pay in the capital as they ask for it, without any question and without any consideration as to the impact that could have on us. So I think this is a very dangerous institution, and this has all been hashed out before, but I think it's very important in terms of the context of what this actual ESM actually is. Now, the purpose of this legislation has been sold to us as to put into effect the decision that was made by the Eurogroup in June 2012, the famous seismic shift, where they affirm that it's imperative to break the vicious circle between banks and sovereigns. And we've seen nothing but rowing back on that since June 2012, when the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, as has been said by other speakers, lauded it here in the House as being the game changer that's going to change everything for us as a nation and put us back on track. They've rolled back continuously through it, right through to June 2014, where the president of the Eurogroup stated that the Direct Recapitalisation Instrument may be achieved in a case a bank fails to attract sufficient capital from private sources, and if the ESM member concerned is unable to recapitalise it, including through the instrument of indirect recapitalisation of the ESM. And then he goes on to say that the financial assistance will be provided in accordance with EU state aid rules, and the ESM member will be asked to invest alongside the ESM. So even if you get to the point of getting over all the hurdles to decide that the ESM is going to directly recapitalise your banks, you have to actually go alongside them with it and fund them in parallel with it as well. And it has been mentioned, other speakers, about the so-called liability cascade and the decision-making processes that will have to happen before the direct recapitalisation can take place. And I think it's useful to look at this in the context of our own bailout, which happened in our own guarantee in relation to the banks and the bailout that happened. I think at the time the estimated liabilities were something like €440 billion that the bank's liabilities were at that time. Well, if you look at the cascade of liability, The first step is that the first 8% at a minimum has to be provided by equity bondholders, uninsured depositors, which in our case would have been about 35 billion euros. The next step is the national resolution funds have to cover a maximum of up to 5%, which in our case at that time would have been 22 billion euros. So that brings us up to 57 billion euros that would have to be put in before you could even look at having the direct recapitalisation instrument used through the ESM. And if you take it that we've put 64 billion euros into the banks already, that leaves 7 billion that could be covered by direct recapitalisation. And then if you go back to the president of the Eurogroup, who says that any recapitalisation has to be done in conjunction with the ESM member putting in funds. So say it's on a 50-50 basis. So that leaves about 3.5 billion euros that we could expect in direct recapitalisation. Now, you could make the argument in our case that the 8% provides for equity from bondholders and uninsured depositors, and we stepped up to the mark and all of that. But the point is that if this happened today, and if we had to get into this, we would be looking at about 3.5 billion euros out of the 64 billion euros that we invested in the banks to save them. So this direct recapitalisation is not a panacea. It's not a resolution for this. I think it is actually a charade that the ESM have added into the treaty to make it look like they want to break the link between sovereigns and banks. And I think a lot of the time on this side of the house, we operate under the kind of the false idea that actually what the government is doing and what Europe wants to do and what the ESM is to do is to look after citizens. And that's not the case. What the government is doing, what the ESM wants to do, and what Europe wants to do is look after banks. And we're coming from the wrong starting point on this side of the house. And that's why we can't understand what you're doing. And I think we do need to look at it from the point of view of what you're actually trying to achieve, which is to financialise the whole of society and financialise the whole of Europe and make all the citizens of Europe responsible for the banks. And that's what this ESM is about achieving. It's not about looking after citizens and protecting citizens from the financial crashes and from financial catastrophe. It's actually about making citizens responsible. And the ESM is the instrument that has been used to copper fasten that responsibility and to ensure that we give unlimited power to a secret body operating out of Luxembourg that has the right to get unlimited borrowing and actually place unlimited demands on member states to underwrite that borrowing. And that is the situation that the ESM is putting in place. And we are going to rush this legislation through this House and sign up slavishly to it. Quite happy to do it without any guarantees from Europe in terms of our own banks and our own recapitalisation. And we might, if the Minister decides at the end of the day, to make an application to them. But I expect that if he does make an application, we'll be very lucky to get even 3 or 4 billion euros in direct recapitalisation. And there's talk of putting that it'll be done through an equity swap in a bank or whatever, an equity swap in the AIB. And that's the level of funding that we can expect to get, I would think, and that's my estimation. And it's as good as anybody else has come up with at this stage, I think, because we definitely haven't heard anything from the government side as to what they hope to achieve from it. Now, and I think Deputy Boyd-Barrett is right in what he said in relation to the 60 billion that's earmarked under the ESM for direct recapitalisation. He is right that it's not a serious figure. It's a figure that's put in there to sell this con to everybody in Europe that the ESM is prepared to do this and prepared to break the link with citizens. Because 60 billion would be a drop in the ocean if there was any serious financial institution in Europe that needed to be recapitalised directly. But the thing about it is that the ESM could decide to increase that 60 billion in 5 minutes at a board meeting and increase it unlimited. But I think the signal that it sends out is that this is not something that we're serious about. This is not something that we're seriously considering using. It's something that we're putting in here as a sop to those people across Europe who are concerned about this. And that is the real problem with this legislation.